You're listening to a podcast by Great Kids. To learn more about us, visit our website at greatkidsinc.org.
This is Different Eyes, the view from the heart of another, a Great Kids podcast about overcoming bias in others and in ourselves. We'll be talking about how we can learn to see what others see, and vice versa, helping others see what we see. Our discussions will revolve around bias, cognitive bias and implicit bias, and how this all relates to the work that you do to support families. Looking back over the past year has proven interesting in so many ways. One day, our reflections evolved into a discussion of cognitive bias and all the ways that this affects decision-making, ours and everyone else's, without us even realizing it. The conversation got interesting enough that it sparked the idea for this podcast. We hope that by beginning to look through the eyes of others and also helping them to see what we see, we might all start to see things that maybe without each other's help, we never would have noticed. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 5. Today we're talking about in-group bias. Shauna Donaldson, the Executive Director of Great Kids, is with me again today to help explore cognitive bias. If you haven't been listening, that's what we're using this platform for. For the next several months, we'll be talking about cognitive bias, how it relates to our lives, and specifically to the field of home visiting.
Yeah. Good morning, Dana. I'm excited today to keep talking about cognitive bias, and we define it as a systematic error in thinking that happens due to our brain's need to simplify information so it can be processed quickly.
Right? So that ability to quickly make sense of the world is all about survival. But the shortcuts that our brains have to take in order to do that can also lead to mistakes in our decision making. And that can have a huge impact on our lives, and our personal lives, our lives, the lives of others.
Yeah, we all have cognitive bias. It's part of being human. We'll never overcome this completely, but talking about them as we are in this series is an essential first step to preventing this kind of thinking from getting us into problems.
Right. So during our explorations, we're working to understand how it is that our brains make inaccurate evaluations, both of ourselves and others. We're hoping that with these conversations, we can all begin to see through the eyes of others and understand how they come to the conclusions that they have about the world.
So far in previous episodes, we've discussed confirmation bias, the bandwagon effect, fundamental attribution error, and naive realism. Oh, that's a mouthful.
Right.
Today, we'll dip our feet into the water of what's called in-group bias. This one could be a whole podcast series on its own, right? But we'll be talking about the basics and exploring some examples. So let's get started.
Okay. So I'm going to start us off a little bit differently today. I was reminded the other day of one of my favorite children's books, and I think it fits in well with our topic today. It's called Old Turtle and the Broken Truth by Douglas Wood. Are you familiar with this one, Shauna?
So I am not familiar with it. And I know you mentioned this ahead of time, but I have intentionally not read it. I wanted to hear it right on the podcast with you talking about it the first time. So I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to share it. I'm not going to read it word for word, but I'm really just going to kind of tell the plot, basically. So in essence, it's a story of how the world came to be so fragmented. And I'll give you kind of my retelling of the basics. A spoiler alert for anyone who doesn't want to know how it ends, because that's kind of the important part of the story for our purposes today. So essentially, it goes like this. So one night in a faraway land that is actually not so far away, a truth falls from the sky. And as it falls, it breaks into two pieces. One piece shoots off into the sky and the other falls straight to the ground. So one day, not too long after that, a man sees that the piece that fell to the ground, he sees it laying on the ground, and he picks it up. And he reads the words, "You are loved." And it makes him feel really good. So he keeps it. And he starts to share it with other people in his tribe. And it makes everyone feel warm and happy. And it becomes kind of this tribe's most prized possession. And they call it the truth. But then things start to get a little bit complicated, because those who have the truth start to become afraid of those people who don't have it, because those people are different from them. And those who don't have it, well, they want it, right? They see how great it feels to the people who have it, and so they want it. And pretty soon what happens is battles and wars start erupting over this small truth, with everyone trying to capture it for themselves. And so one day there's a little girl who is pretty much over the fact that there's growing violence all around her, and destruction and greed that has kind of taken over their once peaceful world. And she goes on a journey to speak with Old Turtle, who is considered the tribe's wisest counselor. So Old Turtle tells her that the truth is broken and is missing a piece. So the two of them go on a search for the missing piece. And when they find it, the little girl puts the missing piece in her pocket and she returns to her tribe. She tries to explain, but no one will listen to her. Finally, she just gives the broken piece to a bird. And that bird flies up to the top of the tower where they keep the truth, right? The other half of the truth, and then joins the pieces together. And when the pieces are joined together, they shine bright with the full truth. You are loved, and so are they. So finally, the people begin to understand, and the earth begins to heal.
That is powerful. That's beautiful, right? And not so different from what's really happening in the world.
Right. And that's exactly why I wanted to share it. I think it really fits in well, particularly with our topic for today, but really in general with our topic for this podcast, being able to remember that we may think differently or see differently than others around us, but really, we're loved and so are they. And so we have to figure out how to all be in this together.
Yeah, we do. So let's talk about it a little bit. Will you define what in-group bias is for us some?
Yeah, so in-group bias, which is actually sometimes called in-group favoritism, is really simply the tendency for people to give preferential treatment to others who belong to the same group that they do. I think it's pretty easy to see how this could be problematic, but I'll share a simple example from my life. So a few years ago when I was living in California, I was walking on the beach and I saw someone with an Iowa Hawkeyes t-shirt on. So I grew up in Iowa and I went to the University of Iowa, which is where the Hawkeyes are from. So I had like this instant feeling of warmth and connection to this person that I'd never even seen before, right? If someone had asked me to pick one person on the beach that day that I wanted to have lunch with, I would have 100% chosen this random stranger with the Iowa shirt on, even though I really knew absolutely nothing about them whatsoever.
Right. We really do make those kind of quick judgments, don't we? It's if I'm traveling and I meet somebody else from the South, right, I have an instant connection to them. Yeah. But what could be happening is that we're easily overlooking opportunities to have an amazing lunch or time with somebody else, right? Somebody that we might even have more in common with because of that bias that we have, because they look like they're from our group. And maybe we even miss out on opportunities to spend time with people who could change our lives. Again, because we look for that, not only that we don't look for, but we have that in-group bias that's just naturally there.
Right, right. So that really starts to get at what I think the biggest problem with this is. So my brain quickly made the assessment that this person was part of my tribe.
Mhm.
And because of our tribal nature, and we've talked about that in previous podcasts, I was drawn to them instantly, even to the exclusion, perhaps, of other worthy lunchmates on the beach.
Mhm. Right. And for all we know, they may have bought their T-shirt at a yard sale or something.
Probably weren't even from Iowa. Right?
Right? But seriously, in a completely unconscious way, your brain snap judgment caused you to discriminate against others who were on the beach that day in favor of this person who was flying their Iowa flag, so to speak.
Right? And that's the real problem here, is that ultimately many forms, and this was just kind of eye-opening for me to think about, many forms of discrimination and bias develop not because we hate people
Mhm.
who aren't part of our tribe, but because positive emotions like empathy and trust are often reserved for our in-group because we favor our in-group. So if we believe that a person belongs to the same group as us, we will have positive views of them, which can cause us to give them preferential treatment. But obviously that can be at the cost of others, right? So clearly this doesn't work out very well for folks. Why do you think this bug in the human brain exists? Any thoughts on that?
There are a few theories that do make sense, but one of the most prominent is what is known as social identity theory.
Yeah.
That theory is based on the simple fact about people that we love to categorize things, including ourselves. Okay? Our very identities are based partially on the social categories that we belong to.
Yeah.
Like these categories could involve pretty much anything, as simple as Iowa shirt wearers or people with Southern dialects, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Those attributions. Now, all of these categories are equally important, but they all contribute to the idea of that we have about who we are and what role we play in society.
Yeah. It's kind of like we're compelled to sort people into groups. And I think there's a second component to this theory too, right? So another basic truth about people is that we have a need to feel positive about ourselves. Yeah. When you combine our need to feel good about ourselves with our need to categorize people and then add in our tribal nature, I think you kind of end up with this perfect storm that can cause our brains to rely on stereotypes that make us favor our in-group.
So basically, our identities are so heavily reliant on the groups we belong to simply a simple way to enhance our self-image is by mentally photoshopping our in-group so they always look good to us.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't make us sound very great, does it? But
No.
but it's important to remember, right? None of these make us sound very great, as we've been talking about cognitive bias. It's like, oh, I do that. But we have to remember that, like all of the cognitive biases, in-group bias happens without our even realizing it. So although we may believe or want to believe that we're being fair and reasonable in our judgments about other people, in-group bias actually demonstrates to us that when we're acting with members of our out-group, we may not be as charitable to them as we are to people who are more like us. And that's hard for any of us to admit, but it's true. In-group bias can have some serious real-world consequences. And there are consequences that maybe aren't so serious, but I think, can you maybe share an example that you can think of from like our work world or our home visiting world that could help us drill down into this one a little bit, maybe?
Yeah. And the one that I thought about was one that I think all of us can connect to, regardless of what field we work in. And let's think about maybe when we go to a conference, right? Back in the old days of actual in-person
the before
conferences,
times, right? The before time. Yeah.
Right? We actually went to a conference. And so we go to this conference, and let's say that, We've gone with people from our program, the people we work with every day, but this is a national home visiting conference. So there's people from all over the country who are really passionate about children and families at this conference. And we walk into the plenary session, and who do you sit with?
Oh,
who do you look for?
Oh, yeah. So such a great example, Shauna. You got me on this one, right? I sit with people from my program. I sit with you or other people that I've come with.
Yeah, we've all been guilty of this at least a time or two. I'm so guilty of it that I would tell you to save me a seat, and I'd be texting or calling to see where you were at.
And you walk in, and everybody's saving seats, right? All their bags are sitting on the seats, trying to save for their tribe. Yeah,
right. So even though, right, we all know we're in this huge group of people that we have very common experiences with, very charitable, loving attributes that we all have because of this field that we work with, people that we know we could learn from, new friends that we could make, we still look for our tribe because that's the people we're most comfortable with.
Yeah. So our favoritism for our own group can be so strong that it can obviously lead us to some less than helpful decisions. So what are your thoughts? What can we do about this? How can we get past it?
In-group bias is very difficult to overcome. Most of the time when it asserts itself, it's not obvious to us, right? It works below that surface of consciousness, right? When I walk into that session, I'm not consciously thinking about, I only want to sit with my tribe because they're most like me, right? It's just, I'm looking for my friends.
You're just naturally drawn to them. Yeah.
So that said, the research points to a tactic that we might try that would help maybe at least to reduce the tendency a little bit. Yeah. Recent evidence has supported the idea that increasing interaction between groups can reduce in-group bias. So simply by interacting more with an out-group, we begin to change our categorizations of others. Then we can expand to include out-group members in this new group identity.
Right. Yeah. And that like make the circle bigger, right? Like it becomes the group gets bigger. Shauna, they've done studies that indicate that even human babies have a positive bias towards people who look and act like the people that they've been exposed to in early life. And that's how human this bias is. We've all got it, even from a really early age. So maybe we start early, right? Being sure that not only are we interacting with other groups, but that we're giving young babies the opportunity to do the same thing.
Absolutely. And, again, it comes down to intentionality. And that's been a theme through each of our podcasts, is we have to work very hard to not doing what comes automatically, but really working hard to override these default systems in our brains.
Yeah.
Maybe when we enter an event or a situation, instead of looking around for the people we already know, right, or who are like us, maybe we move to creating a habit of deliberately and intentionally seeking out opportunities that will expose us to new people, new ideas, new cultures, and new places.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to stay aware of our in-groups, right? But we don't have to let them control our decision-making. So when we feel ourselves sort of being drawn to the people that we know, we stop and we say, but what could I learn, right? We find people who will help us expand our horizons. They'll help us learn and grow. And when we get with these people, we need to listen carefully and share openly, right? To both honor the differences between us, but also to find the similarities between us, because they may not be that different from us, right? Just because we haven't met them yet.
And there it is, right? We've circled back, as we so often do, to this place of empathy. Seeking out similarities helps us see through the eyes of the other in a way that it takes us to a greater place of empathy for them and a connection to them.
Right. You know how I love when we end on empathy. So good place to stop for today.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on this journey into a deeper understanding of inclusion and belonging, really. Being aware of our biases is the most important first step. Wanting to do better makes you better.
Yeah. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to continue this conversation about seeing through the eyes and the hearts of another. And we hope to see you then. Be well.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.